Okay, I am going to cover the art of classical Greece in this lecture. And when I refer to classical Greece for the purpose of this class, this is also covering the Archaic period, early classical, and high classical. In the next lecture, we'll cover late classical and Hellenistic period. Some vocabulary terms here are Acropolis, the archaic smile, the Centauromachy, contrapposto, fluting, chori, choros, and volute. On the screen is also a map of Greece as we refer to it today, although at the time these are city-states, just like the city-states that we looked at in Mesopotamia. They're not all together as one country until later on. So, a few things to note about this time period. Humanity becomes the measure of all things, much like it is in the Western civilization still today. And from this comes democracy, as well as major contributions in art, literature, and science. Something very different from this civilization, this culture, than what we looked at in ancient Egypt, for example, is they're always seeking change. In fact, quite opposite of ancient Egypt. Thousands of years with very little change. Here, there's always looking to improve artistic trends, fashions, and affecting stylistic evolution over just a few centuries. And the contrast, and those contrasts with the conventions of Egypt. They became united for the first time at the first Olympic Games in 776 BC. There, they were all citizens of Hellas. And Hellas is the Greek word for Greece, and it refers to land. But they were still not under one ruler. There was a king of each city-state. For the pantheon, the religion, the gods are just immortal humans. So humanity really is the center of all things. And while there are a lot of great things that come out of ancient Greece, not everything is what we would consider an ideal society today. Slavery was a large part of the culture, as was colonization. So once uh, what is now modern day Greece is all settled, they they start moving outwards. They cross the Aegean Sea and they colonize all of the coastal regions. They also go south in the Mediterranean and colonize Egypt, as well as west and colonize what is now Italy. First, we'll look at a few things. Oh, and another part of not quite an ideal society, the women were not allowed to leave the house. They were, well, I should say, they only were allowed to leave the house for weddings, funerals, and religious festivals. Otherwise, they stayed in. So, you don't need to be able to recognize artworks as archaic per se, but something about the archaic time period, it's the time of invention and experimentation. They're very much inspired by Egyptian style. So they've been um, trading with Egypt for a long time. It's a vigorous colonization pyramid when there are settlements in North Africa and Italy. It's also the time that Pythagoras of Samos was living. This is where you get the Pythagorean theorem, if you remember that uh, from high school, maybe middle school. And you'll receive a handout of this next slide. This is the Greek orders. So you will want to be able to distinguish between the three Greek orders. So these are the temple plans, temple layouts, and they are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. The Doric order is mostly found on the mainland and is used first during the Archaic and early Classical and even through to the High Classical period. And the Ionian um, and Aegean Islands, the Ionian order is developed on the Ionian and Aegean Islands. Um, and the Ionic, well, let me go back to the uh, Corinthian gets introduced in the Hellenistic period, and often it gets adapted into the Roman period in modern day Italy. So some things to note about the differences between the three capitals is that the frieze at the top of the Doric order has triglyphs and metopes. The triglyphs are marked by three lines, so triglyph, and that is just a pattern design, the three lines. And then the metope, which is left blank in this uh, picture, would have a sculpture, a relief sculpture attached to it. And you'll notice the Ionic and the Corinthian are the friezes are blank. There, they would be filled with relief sculptures instead of triglyphs. The pediments on all three of them are a triangle that would also be filled with sculptures. Now, so the Doric order has the frieze that has the triglyphs and metopes. It also has the capital at the top that kind of looks like a squished pancake, if you will. And notice the fluting of the column. The fluting is the lines in the columns. They're kind of scooped out almost if you saw them in person in 3 dimensions. And the Doric column is heavier, it's thicker, and the fluting is farther apart. Whereas the Ionic is and Corinthian are often taller and thinner, and the fluting is much closer together. But what really you can tell the capitals apart. So I mentioned the squish pancake, the flattened pancake for the Doric. For the Ionic, there are volutes, and those are the swirls at the top. So it is a spiral that comes out. In between the volutes, those swirls, is an egg and dart pattern, which you can't see super well in this drawing. And then the Corinthian capital is leaves of the acanthus plant. So you have quite the distinguishing marks in the capitals. And then for the Doric order, you also have the triglyphs and metopes. And yes, the Ionic is light and airy in comparison. Okay. Here is the Temple of Aphia at Aegina, and it is a Doric order. You can see those capitals very well, the kind of flattened pancake. They are very sturdy and wider columns. The fluting is not very close together, it's spread out. But also you can see in the frieze that the triglyphs and metopes are still intact. The sculptures from the metopes have been removed, and the pediment is gone. But it is really remarkably intact for most temples at this time. And people would enter the area via a gateway and see the temple at an angle. They actually didn't go inside, just like the temples at Mesopotamia. The public would not go inside the temple. Only the high priests and maybe royalty would go inside. And the temples here are the house of the gods. So, of course, the everyday public person would not be allowed in. What they would do instead is walk around the the temple and see all of the sculptures in the frieze and on the metapiece on the front and the back. And there was an altar outside of the temple so people could leave offerings, votive offerings, which might be animal sacrifice. Usually that's during a festival, but it also might be votive sculptures or food or flowers, whatever makes sense for that deity. And we're going to take a look at the sculptures from the pediments, what survives of them. So here is the west pediment of the Temple of Aphia at Aegina. And in the center is going to be the tallest figure. A little bit of hierarchy of scale is being used. And they, to put the figures into the corners, there needs to be everybody either starts getting smaller, but more likely are going to bend over a little bit and then be crouching and then be lying down to get into the corners. And here there is a battle scene happening, and we're going to look closely at the figure on the far right who is laying down, and he is a dying warrior. So this dying warrior from the Temple of Aphia, is holding an arrow that has penetrated his chest. So that's how we know he is dying. Certainly, his facial features do not suggest someone who is in pain or is dying from a wound. Notice the body is pretty awkward and stiff. It is frontal, so it's twisted in a weird way in order for us, the viewer, to see it from the front. And it is idealized. So um, you see some muscles on there, and this is not an old person. And the face has wearing an archaic smile, what is called the archaic smile. So even though he is dying, he's smiling. And this is not to suggest that he's happy or not feeling any pain. Instead, it is, well, is a bit of a mystery, and everyone has their theories, but the most recent and the one that was the most logical to me suggests the archaic smile suggests an inner happiness. And so to die a warrior's death is the best way to go. And he felt like he's lived a good life. Um, but also, when in ancient Greece, the idea is to overcome any emotion. So any negative or super positive emotion would be seen as a weakness. Logic is the goal. Frontal uplifting. So archaic smile, frontal uplifting, consulting my notes. But now let's look at the dying warrior from the opposite side, from the east pediment. Already quite a shift. And notice that if you go back, the date 500 to 490 BCE to 490 to 480 BCE. So just like a decade or two apart. Probably a different sculptor, but we already see this is a time of experimentation, and we see that there is a development in the way that the body is portrayed. I'll also mention we're seeing right away some male nudity in ancient Greece, and we'll see that throughout. And in this instance, the nude rather than naked, but also there are three types of men that are going to be portrayed in sculpture or in art at all. And that is a god, a warrior, or an athlete. And here in this example, we're seeing the warriors. They didn't actually fight in the nude. They wore armor, but nudity was shown as for symbolic reasons to suggest bravery. So they have idealized bodies, and they are shown in the nude to suggest that this is a state without clothing where you're the most exposed, and rather than in portraying them as weak, even though they're exposed, it instead suggests the opposite. They're brave by exposing themselves to elements. So both of them are nude, and we already see development in the musculature of this figure. But he's also no longer full, like twisted in an awkward way to be completely frontal. He's actually one arm is trying to pull himself back up on his shield, the other is bracing the ground, and he's not looking at us. There's no longer a smile, and instead he's kind of grimacing and in pain. So there is now a slight accepting of the fact that it's painful to die and it's hard to die. He's kind of contemplating his own death. But it's both traditional and experimental at the same time. And we can further look at the development of the figure. If we go, this is going back again in the dates, 600 to 590 BC, we have this Koros figure. So the Koros figure are the male figures. They are, again, one of those three types of figures: a god, a warrior, or an athlete. This one is located in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, so it's often called the Metropolitan Koros. And it very much is inspired by ancient Egyptian sculptures. And so the female Kore figures are Kore, are represented as deities, priestesses, or nymphs, and they are all clothed. So these are either funerary, they would be placed over a burial of one's ashes, or a votive offering to put into a temple. It's thought that perhaps this one is Apollo, but it's not sure. We can see elements of both ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia in the design. So that very patterned, stylized hair, kind of braids, might be inspired by ancient Mesopotamia. The stance, 100% comes from ancient Egypt. So he has that figure with one foot, one left foot in front of the other. There's just a slight indication of ankles here, but the body is very geometric and the hands are down at its side. The difference, of course, is that he is not clothed. And that is a reflective of the culture. He has a triangular shaped head. There's a flatness to the face, abstract patterning of the pelvis, the hair beads, and the shin bones. But the same rigidly frontal with left foot advanced, arms held beside the body, and clenched fist. This one perhaps might be a funerary statue, actually. But it's also freed from the stone block. So the purpose of this, if these are both funerary statues, this Koros does not need to hold the soul of the deceased because the religion has a different ideas of afterlife. But jumping forward just around 70 years is the Anavistos Kuros. So this was found in Anavistos, and this is a warrior. We know because there was an inscription on the base of this piece. It says, "Stay and mourn at the marker of dead Croesus, whom raging Ares destroyed once on a day in the front ranks." And Ares is the god of war, suggesting that he was in the military. And we see now a more naturalistic work. There's more development in the musculature. It's less geometric. We finally have ankles and calf muscles. But he does still wear the archaic smile. Here is a picture from the back. You get a sense of the braiding. It's still very stylized and patterned, but it's a little bit more naturalistic. It stabs, you can see at one point, because it would have been wearing a helmet. It's still not a portrait. This is not what Croesus looked like, but a type. So these would be made for, and people would be able to buy them and put them over a funerary spot for the deceased, similar to the votive offerings in Mesopotamia, where they would be commissioned to put them in the temple. So there'd be some elements of Croesus, but it's certainly not a true portrait. And you can see the difference between um, just a few decades can make from for the naturalism of the Koros figure. Let's see. And here is one of the few Kori figures. So this is the Peplos Kori, it's called. It was discovered in 1884 from a pit near the Erechtheion. It was dumped by the Athenians after the Acropolis was destroyed by the Persian army in 480 BC. So females were less common as sculptures. Like I said, there were just goddesses or priestess and maybe a nymph, which is another mythological person, kind of. And they're always clothed. Always clothed. We don't see nudity in females until we get to the Hellenistic period. So it was named after the type of clothing it's wearing, the peplos. And that is a large cloth gathered at the waist and pinned at the shoulders. But this Corey is wearing four different types of garments, and one only a goddess would have worn. So uh, we know that this is a depiction of a goddess. And the female ones also become less and less stylized. She is also wearing an archaic smile here. And we can see on here there are remnants of paint. So chromatic paint. And here's an artist rendering of what she might have looked like. This has her holding the apple, which suggests she would be I again almost said Athena, but uh sorry, not Aphrodite. I struggle with that. Aphrodite, who was awarded the golden apple from Paris of Troy to suggest that she was the most beautiful goddess. However, it was found on the Acropolis, so it's quite possible that this one is of Athena, but we're not sure. So this is what she might have looked like with the full paint on. Also, at this time, vase making and vase painting becomes a huge market in ancient Greece. So by the mid 6th century, Athenians are taking export market of fine painted ceramics across the Aegean and Mediterranean. And the people who create the vases and the paintings become famous for their designs and skills. So we start seeing signed artworks. So Ezekias made this vase, and he was the finest vase painter, or I should say, painted this vase. So sometimes it would be the same person who throw the vase on the potter's wheel as the same person who painted it, but often it became people who specialize in throwing the clay and a person who specialized in painting. So Ezekias is the master of the black figure vase. We don't aren't they're not using registers anymore. It's one large framed panel. And he is depicting the calm before the storm. This is Achilles and Ajax, major characters from the story of the Trojan War in the Iliad. And they are taking a break right now before they go back to battle. And if you read this story, you'll know that Achilles dies a horrible death. But um, this is a calm before the storm. They're ready for the battle at any moment. And this is not usually depicted in archaic art. It's more of a classical theme. So Ajax on the right calls out three, Achilles four. Wins, but when he goes to battle, he's killed. Ajax is overcome with grief at his friend's death and later kills himself. You had to know the story to understand the depth of the composition, and it shows off the skill in the pattern on the heroes' cloaks, their floral design, and the shape of the men echo the shape of the vase, and the lines of the spears with the directional force of those diagonal lines leads our eyes to the dice game. And it's all a really beautiful composition. I wanted to show you these three revelers. So often the theme on the vase would relate to what kind of material would be held inside the vase. So this is a wine vase, and we have Euthydemus, three revelers here, and that means this is a wine vase, and here are three drunk guys, and they're doing a little dance. So they're drunk, they're having fun, and it makes sense because it's holding wine. Whereas um, a lot of these vases would be awarded for athletes when you have these warriors on them. And I am not going to get into all of the different types of vases where you need to remember those, but notice that these three revelers are a red figure painting, whereas the Ezekias, Achilles, and Ajax is a black figure. And so they're experimenting with the slip that they're making. So the black figure is a negative process where they dip the entire thing in the slip and then remove parts of it to create the composition. Notice that early on we still have that they're in true profile here, but we do still have the side eye, big side eye. And here we get to the red figure where they're painting on um, the sorry, I'm thinking they're actually painting on the slip for the black figure. It's the opposite of what I was saying. And they're removing the slip for the red figure. But they are also, you see a development in that they are um, able to get more fine detail with the red figure and are looking at three-quarter profile views and a movement in the body that is much less stiff as time goes on. Okay, so we're moving into classical Greece, and I'll mention too, the word archaic often now is just synonymous with old or outdated, but it comes from this older period of ancient Greece. And we move into the classical period. This is now the Latin word classis, which refers to a division of class based on wealth. Now we talk about first class as a standard of excellence. Classical art, and you might hear classical literature. That's the best and most well-known literature. Classical music is actually instrumental music from the Victorian era. Classic rock is the best of rock. So it's a term that kind of references the best of. But when you talk about classical art, we're talking about ancient Greek and Roman works. But classical Greece is this time period that the most idealized and most naturalistic artwork is being created. And there's a focus on three concepts that relate to what we've already talked about: humanism, rationalism, and idealism. So the concepts in the artwork: man is the measure of all things. This is ideal based on the human form. And know thyself, which means to seek inner significance of forms and nothing in excess, to reproduce only essential forms. And these are all coming from the great philosophers of the time period. So after the Persians sacked Athens in 480 BCE, the Greeks won a decisive naval victory of over the Persians at Salamis. This was a difficult war, and it appeared Asia would swallow up Greece. There were just so many soldiers, and the Persian king Xerxes would rule. In battles, Persians killed males and they sold women and children into slavery. At this time, Greeks had not, they've moved past the um, selling women and children into slavery, and they would not necessarily kill all the males. So they called the Asian invaders barbarians. The classic time period is the time of the dramatists Sophocles and Euripides, the historian Herodotus, the statesman Pericles, the philosopher Socrates, and many famous artists. What we're looking at on the slide is the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. It was destroyed in an earthquake, so you can see how the columns, with their wide fluting, this Doric column, uh, is made out of drums. So big chunks of marble that would have a metal rod going through the center. You can see some of them even have the holes in the center and would be stacked on top of another, and then the capital attached at the top. So the one column that is standing was recreated so that when you visit, you can get a sense of scale. And you can tell that it's recreated because it is that lighter, whiter color, which means it came out of the quarry much more later. Actually, I don't think that the ones on the ground are marble on this one. I can't remember. So here is an example of one that is still intact. This is the Temple of Hera 2, possibly Apollo, Paestum in Italy. So the Greeks have colonized Italy at this point, and you can see the entire Doric order is still standing here. These are really kind of fat, wide columns, and these thicker, wider fluting. You get that squish pancake at the top, the frieze with the triglyphs, 3 lines, and the metapiece, and the pediment at the top with the triangle. From the Temple of Zeus, this is a metope frieze, or from a metope relief sculpture. And so it went all the way around to tell a story. And they thematically connect to the site. So the Temple of Olympia is the Temple of Zeus at Olympia is the site of the Olympic Games, the first Olympic Games. And Heracles was the founder of the Olympic Games. Notice I'm saying Heracles and not Hercules. Hercules is the Roman name. Heracles is the Greek. He was named after Hera, who Zeus cheated on to have this child. If you've seen the Disney movie Hercules, forget everything about it. It's all entirely inaccurate, according to the myths. So, Heracles is the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Alcmene. Hera hated the fact that Zeus constantly cheated on her with mortals, with other gods, and she sent 2 serpents to attack the infant in the cradle. But he was so strong, he strangled the snakes. And when he became an adult, he got married, and Hera caused him to go mad. And he ended up killing his wife and children, beat her to death with his club. And in order to make up as a punishment for killing his wife, he had to accomplish 12 labors. So first he killed the Nemean lion, and he wears its pelt. And he's often depicted with the pelt and a club. This is representing his strength. And here he is the center figure holding up the sky for Atlas, who helped him obtain the apples of Hesperides. This is the last of the 12, or one of the last of the 12 labors. And you can see he has some extra cushion on his shoulders. Atlas was um, not a god, but a titan. So he kind of predates the gods. And so Heracles needs some extra cushion with the weight of the world on his shoulders, literally. And Athena is standing behind him and offering some extra support with one hand. Notice that their faces, they're all very stoic, not showing emotion. This is the ultimate ideal for the Greeks, right? Showing emotion is showing weakness. But it's also kind of stiff and severe. So this is called the severe style. And it's quiet and serene. The rest of the story is, though, that Atlas comes back. So Atlas knows where the apples are. So Heracles comes and says, I'll hold the world for you for a while. This was Atlas's punishment that Zeus bestowed upon him. He said, I'll hold the world for you for a while if you'll go get the golden apples of Hesperides for me. So he does that. And when he comes back, though, he's showing them to Heracles. And he says, You know what, though? I'm not taking the world back. Sorry. And Heracles says, You know what? I understand. That's fair. Would you mind taking it just for a moment so I can readjust? It's hurting my neck in a world weird way. And Atlas says, You know what? Sure, of course. I'll take that from you. And when he does, Heracles takes his golden apples and says, Peace out. I'm not holding the world. So this is that moment that Atlas comes back with the apples before he takes the world back. So here is a rendering of the pediment, the west pediment of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, and we'll take a closer look at the what remains of these sculptures. A lot of them have been broken over the years, and in large part because uh, it's a seismic activity. There's a lot of earthquakes in Greece. But some of the other reasons is because Greece is kind of it's at the eastern edge of Europe. And so it's kind of the middle ground for wars with the Middle East and further east and Europe. So the Temple of Zeus was more lavishly decorated. And here we see the West Pediment. Apollo is in the center. And he is very calm while the Centauromachy is taking place all around him. This is a common theme for temples. And sorry, once again, this is where the Disneyfication of Hercules and many stories of ancient Greek mythology really change the story. So centaurs are very intelligent and they're really great at the bow and arrow, but they are wild beasts. And these composite creatures in ancient Greece are all monsters. They're all lessons for humans as a way to show that we need to overcome our animalistic nature and our animalistic urges. So the centaurs are half horse, half human, and during this time, they were invited to a wedding. Their neighbors, the Lapith Greeks. They go to the wedding and they have a good time. However, they cannot stop themselves from drinking too much, and they attempt sexual assault on the women of the Lapith. So here is a close-up, and we can see the difference between the centaurs. They have kind of gaunt bodies in the horse forms, and they are older. They have beards and are uglier, if you will, if according to the ancient Greeks. Than the men who wear this still very stoic, as well as the woman who is being molested in the image on the left. They show no emotion because that is the goal, right? No emotion. While the centaurs fight dirty. Uh, in the figure on the right, he is biting the arm of the man who they are fighting with. And on the left, he is groping the woman in an attempt to uh, kidnap her and or sexually assault her. And the lesson is that we need to enforce reason and order over chaos. We need to control our animalistic urges. Okay. So we then now are going to have the introduction of contrapposto. This is the marcation between the early classical period and the high classical period. The Critios boy here is the next step in the evolution of the Koros figure. But what is different is that he is showing contrapposto. This is a Italian word that means counterbalance. And this is how people actually stand. If we were in class right now, I would have everybody stand up and you would stand how you normally stand, which is with one knee locked, the back knee, and the other knee just ever so slightly bent. This is how we often stand, and then we shift our weight from the locked knee to the other when it becomes a lot. That way, we're always kind of resting one foot or one leg and then putting our weight onto the other. This causes a slight jut of the hip, and it's a counterbalance. It's a balance of weight. Um, Also, so there is an abandonment of the rigid, unnatural Egyptian-inspired pose from the Archaic period. Never before has a sculptor been concerned with portraying how a human being, as opposed to a stone sculpture, truly stands. And the reason is the reason for these sculptures in ancient Greece is just completely different from the reason to create sculptures in ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. Um, his head is also slightly, ever so slightly tilted to away from the center, which is moving out of that very stiff frontal box. And then from there, or here you can for one see the difference. And from the back view of Critios boy, you can see that one hip is jutting out versus the other. And while the Anavisos Koros is more naturalistic than its predecessors, it is still very stiff and frontal, arms at the side, hands and fists. And it just continues from there. So these Raachi warriors, there were two of them that were found in 1972 off the coast of the toe of Italy in a cargo ship sunk in antiquity. So the preferred medium, by the way, of the ancient Greeks was bronze. Um, Marble was readily available. That's where the quarries were. And so there are some marbles that survive from the originals, not nearly as many bronzes because they were melted down by and used for war by later cultures. So those few pieces that are bronze that survive often were lost or thought to be something else. And actually even a lot of the marbles that we see that survive are copies of the originals that luckily for us, the Romans absolutely loved Greek sculptures, so they made many copies of the originals. So this was a ship that had sunk in the ancient classical period. These sculptures were being shipped elsewhere. And after several years of cleaning and restoration, after 2,000 years in water, this is what they look like now. So it would have had a spear and a helmet and a shield. And I don't know if I have a close up. I just have the back. But you can kind of see here the lips, actually the nipples and the eyes are inset with copper or another material. Um, the weight shift is more pronounced than Cretios boy here. The head turn is more forcefully to the right. The hip swing is more markedly visible, and the arms have been freed from the body. Natural motion is now the norm. And he still fits within the three types of male figures that are being portrayed. He is a warrior and would have been, ready to go to war, fight a battle in this sculpture. Okay. So let's look at some funerary practices. So the ancient Greeks would have a funeral pyre, no mummification, and the body is not necessary to get to the afterlife. So they would cremate, and then they would bury the ashes. And above there might be a tomb kind of built like this. This is somebody who is pretty wealthy, higher in class. They also might have just buried the ashes and put a vase on top of it. So this is referred to as the tomb of the diver. And here, because of this fresco that is showing someone diving into this kind of blob of water. And it's symbolic of a transitionary space again, right? So he's diving from this platform into the great unknown, this pile of blue, which represents the afterlife. And he's going freely and joyfully into this space. And this travertine slab was above the deceased as a roof for this tomb. And also inside the tomb was this depiction of a symposium. So a symposium in ancient Greece is only men were invited. Occasionally there may be a woman who is a slave who would be serving the men. But generally, it is a place for men. This is wealthy aristocrats that would participate. They would drink wine and they reclined while they ate. So here they are on these benches and they're holding vases for wine. So the three figures on the left are all looking for more wine. We need more wine. And scientists, by the way, say it could be healthy to eat that way. But also, they're often coupled up. A man with a beard equals a mature man, one who is older. And the youths would be late teens, would have no beards in these depictions. So it could be someone who is their apprentice, but it would also be taken as a lover. So this was very common at the time. Like I said, they might have slave girls or sex workers instead of boys, but they would not eat with the men. And all of these men would still take women as wives. The symposium focused on wine, music, games, and lovemaking. Now, we here is another example of an athlete. So we have an artist again, Myron. This is the Disco Bilobus. This is actually a Roman copy because the original was a bronze and it was melted down. But this is one of the ones that looks most naturalistic as far as we can tell from the original. Um, Bronze was more expensive than marble, and copyists had to add a tree trunk to help support the weight. And they never quite capture the quality of the original, but they're indispensable for today. And they like to pose at the classical, high classical period, pose men in action, but at the moment of the most tension. So this is going to be something very distinct between the classical period and the Hellenistic period. When they're choosing the moment in the story. So this is the moment of the most tension, right before the climax of the action. He's getting ready to throw, and he is completely wound up. All of his muscles are tense, and he's hasn't quite released all of the energy he's built up. And the body is creating two intersecting arcs. This is a geometric composition, and the Greeks love to put people in geometric shapes. So there's these semicircles, triangles, and even 90-degree angles, all imposing order on the chaos of nature. Again, no expression on his face. He's stoic. Order and reason over emotion. The artist moved away from the archaic smile, but he's still not emotional because that is chaos. And it is natural to want to impose order. Now, here we have the culmination of the evolution of the human figure, the male figure in ancient Greece. This is Polykletos' spear bearer, or Doryphoros. And this starts with the archaic Koros figures, to the Kritios boy, to the Raachi warrior, to here, the spear bearer. And Polykletos is following Pythagoras' theory that beauty resides in the harmonious numerical ratios. Polykletos set out to create a canon, a standard of perfection. His writing said that beauty arises from the commensurability of parts, such as that of the finger to a finger, and all of the fingers to the palm, and of wrist, and of these to the forearm, and of these of the forearm to the upper arm, and in fact of everything to everything else. So every single piece of this figure is a work of art. And the correct proportions is his ideal. This is again a Roman copy after a bronze original, and the bronze would not have the struts that hold the hand to the hip or the tree trunk that awkwardly holds the leg. The contrapposto is more pronounced than ever, and in fact, it looks as though he is about to take a step off of that platform. So quite a jet in the hip, and the one knee is bent much further than before. Again, he's imposing order on human movement to perfect it and to make it beautiful. It's a harmony of opposites. We have a relaxed arm on the left side, a relaxed leg on the right, and so on, so on. He also was a warrior, so he would have had a spear, hence the name spear bearer. And then kind of wrapping up the classical period, the culmination of architecture. While Polykletos is the culmination of the evolution of the human figure, here we have the Acropolis is the culmination of the architecture. So Athens emerges from the Persian invasion with power and prestige. They create a Delian League. These are people all over Greece who agreed to help each other in war. So they put all of their war funds and give it to Athens for safekeeping. Athens has a dominant role in the league, and it's also the site of academia. So all of the philosophers and mathematicians and everybody is coming to Athens to learn. And Sparta is home of war. However, Athens had a naval force that ended up taking down, winning the decisive battle over Persia. So the treasury is moved to Athens, and Pericles is the ruler at the time in Athens, and he used that money for the greater good in reconstructing the Acropolis. And not everybody was happy about that because they gave him money expecting that he would put it in a treasury, and instead he put it into uh, the Temple of Athena. And the historian Plutarch said at the time that Pericles used the funds donated for a common war effort to, quote, gild and embellish with images extravagant temples like some pretentious woman decked out in precious stones, end quote. So it's important to note the beautiful buildings that we still continue to go look at today on the Acropolis are a result of tyranny and abuse of power. So we'll look at a couple of these buildings. And the Nike Temple is fascinating as well. We won't get into much of that. The Propylaea is the entryway. So an Acropolis, by the way, is a city on a hill. So we looked at Necropolis, City of the Dead. The Acropolis is a city on the hill. So this is, if you go to Athens, you can see the Acropolis from all over the town. The city is down below. This is a rocky outcropping, kind of a hill, and on top is the Temple of Athena. Promachos here, and we'll also look at the Erechtheion. So we do have artists or architects here. Callicrates and Iktinos created the Parthenon in 447 to 432 BC. So there's no priests and no altar. It's not technically not even a real temple. It itself is a votive offering to Athena. And again, people would not go inside. There is a giant cult statue of Athena inside, and you'd be able to see her from the entryway. During the Middle Ages, the Parthenon became a Byzantine church, and then later a Roman Catholic church, and even a mosque during the Ottoman Empire. And at that, all through this, it was fully intact. It's not until 1687 that Venetians besieged the Acropolis and hit it with a rocket, and it's where the Ottomans were holding ammunition. So the interior was destroyed, unfortunately. And in 1801 to 1803, Thomas Bruce, Lord Elgin, purchased the exterior sculptures and moved them all to London. And it was under the Ottoman rule, a Muslim rule at the time, so this was a legal transaction. Now the stone is decaying from air pollution, and while they've been working on this quite a bit, the acidity that's in the atmosphere is still doing damage, and it's really hard to do any reversal of that damage. But it is still a gorgeous building, and it is a culmination of search for ideal architectural proportions. Notice that there are the Doric order on the outside, and then you can still see the triglyphs and metopes, and part of the pediment is still visible. But if we look at this cutaway, inside it has a double colonnade, and inside it still has Doric capitals, but there are no triglyphs and metopes. It's just a continual frieze, which is more common with the Ionic layout. Ionic. The floor curves upward in the center, which forms a very shallow dome, and the outside columns lean inward slightly, creating a dynamic harmony, like a contrapposto for the architecture. And it also combines these Doric and Ionic aspects. So here is a what is left of a Metope relief sculpture. This is again the Lapith fighting a centaur. So the centauromachy is a really common theme during this time because it shows the men, humanity overcoming that animalistic nature. But now that we're in the high classical period, it becomes very kind of dramatic and again the moment of the most tension. So this man was holding a spear or a knife and is about to kill the centaur. However, he hasn't done it yet. He's completely drawn back. It's very theatrical, very open, diagonal lines in his legs. And I thought I might have had a comparison with the others. The other one that we looked at that's earlier classical is that moment of the battle, of fighting. And this is fighting, but it's the moment before the action. Okay, 92 Metope sculptures, each depicting battles. They symbolize Athenian victory over Persia, reason over unbridled animalistic passion. It's the human at his best in this X pose, perfectly draped with his cloak. And the centaurs, as I mentioned, they were invited to the wedding. They got drunk. They abducted and sexually assaulted the Lapith women. So inside that Ionic frieze, this was the sculptural order. It's a pan-Athenaic festival procession that took place every 4 years in Athens. And these are young women and men from the procession, and they are Athenians. These are humans. For the first time, we're putting just regular humans, the civilization, the culture, onto the temple of the goddess. So this was a votive offering to her, but it's showing that they continue to do this festival in her honor. But pretty bold for them to put themselves there. But they're not true portraits. They are the people of Athens. They're not Pericles and Pythagorean and the people. So this took place every 4 years, and they would parade through the city to the Acropolis. They would redress the cult statue of Athena and offer votive gifts and sacrifice animals. And inside the temple, you have the Athena Parthenos. And the Parthenos portion of that word references her virginity. So she is the virgin goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom and of war. And the original sculpture is lost, but there are lots of small scale copies in marble. And in writings, we have really great descriptions, so we have an idea. And she is the most expensive thing on the entire Acropolis. She is wearing a clothing, shield, and headdress of gold. And this is a chryselephantine statue. And that means the gold and then the skin tone is made of ivory. It was 40 foot tall, and the Parthenon was designed around her. The sculpture inside had a wooden armature, and then the golden drapery, ivory flesh. She's standing on a pedestal that shows sculpture relief of Pandora, the story of Pandora opening the box, which released all of the sicknesses and illnesses to mankind. And you can see in this artist rendering two figures standing there, and they would just come over the base. So this is huge sculpture, 4 stories high. And on her, she has a helmet, a shield, and a spear. These are all symbols of war and the victory. She holds a winged goddess, Nike, the personification of victory. This is all referring to the victory of 479 CE against the Persians. And I'll note she's kind of become a bit of a feminist icon. However, women did not fight in in battles. And so she is not meant to represent a strong womanhood. As we know, the Greeks kept their women at home, um, but instead a personification of this idea um, of victory. So here is a small marble copy of the original, and everywhere where there were references of victories. The soles of her sandals depicted the Centauromachy. The outside of the shield was the Amazonomachy, which, by the way, the Amazons, they were women who did fight, and in the mythology, they would cut off one of their breasts so that they could be better archers. And they were considered monsters as well. They were something to overcome. And so when the Greeks won the battle over the Amazons, it just reinforces the idea that it is unnatural for women to fight. And inside the shield was a depiction of the Gigantomachy. So the giants are titans, and the gods, once they arrive on the scene, fight the titans, and they win there as well. The snake that stands inside the shield is a reference to a mythical origins of Athens. The snake was understood as a representation of Erectonius, the offspring of Hephaestus and Earth or Gaia, and a reference to the aboriginal origins of Athens, the time before the Olympian gods' triumph over giants. And we talked a little bit about how snakes in the ancient world were not symbols of evil, but rather of healing and of the earth. She is also wearing this is a leather armor that depicts the face of Medusa and snakes coiled around her. So the face of Medusa is meant to strike fear in the hearts of men. This recreation still stands in Nashville. Alan LeQuire created it in 1990 for a World's Fair that was hosted there, and it is made of gypsum and fiberglass with gilding. So it is not ivory and gold, but it is pretty beautiful. I have not seen it myself yet, but hope to someday. And then lastly, let's talk about the Erechtheion. It replaced the old temple of Athena that the Persians burned down. And that one had an old wooden cult statue. But they also used it to worship other deities related to the city. There were two old kings of the city that were raised to demigod status, and their tombs are located at the Erechtheion, as well as Poseidon. So it is a coastal town, and according to legend, Poseidon staked his claim for the city by striking the Acropolis with a rock with a trident, which produced saltwater spring. And in this competition, Athena caused an olive tree to grow miraculously. And so much of the ancient economy is based on the production of olive oil, olives, and everything that they can make with that. And the olive tree can live for thousands of years. So Athena won that, but they're still wanting a temple, a place to worship Poseidon as well. This temple is asymmetrical, and it's kind of the antithesis of the simple, harmonious, balanced Parthenon just across the Acropolis. It incorporates all the natural details. They weren't able to level it since it's a rocky mountain. So instead, they worked with it. It makes it very uneven. It's decorated lavishly in the ancient world, and these are, notice, an ionic order here of columns, and they had inlays of gold and rock crystals and colored glass. And on the left side, you can see the porch of the maidens, the caryatids. So here are the caryatids. It's the most decorative part of the Erechtheion, and they resemble the archaic Korai figures in their frontal stance, but there's a very classical display of contrapposto, and they have highly detailed drapery. The drapery folds resemble fluting of a column, and they give volume, making it possible for them to carry the weight of the, the roof above them. And they have just enough rigidity to suggest structural columns and just enough flexibility to suggest the living body. These are very famous, and the originals had to be taken down, um, and because of the acidic rain. But they are in the museum, the Acropolis Museum now. And these are recreations that are out there. So that encompasses the early and high classical periods of Greece.